our core values here at Community of Joy in a series that I've been calling At the Core of Joy. We're coming down the home stretch. Today we're at number 7 of our 8 core values. A core value, as I have said every week for the last 6 weeks, and I'll say it today for the 7th, and then I'll say it again for the 8th. A core value is more than words on a paper. It is more than words on a wall. It is more than words on a website. A core value is a guiding principle that dictates our behavior. It guides who we are and how we live our lives as a people, as a congregation. And 19 years ago, when Pastor Sharon and I came here, it was important for us to sit down and articulate out these core values that guide who we are and what we're about as a congregation. And so we have, for the last 6 weeks, talked about 6 of them. There is one that always comes first, and all the others flow out of that. And so I'm going to test you this morning. I'm curious. We'll do it collectively. I'm not going to put anybody on the spot, but I want to know if you can tell me what the 6 core values that we've talked about the last 6 weeks are. They're all 2 words. One's 3. And let's start with the first one. Always Jesus. Give me some others. Open arms. Beloved mess. Serving hands. Among the broken. Risking together. That was last week. That's next. We haven't done that one yet. Beloved mess, risking together, serving hands, open arms, among the broken, and always Jesus. That's the 6. I guess I missed one in my counting. Today, our core value is transformational circles. Because I believe life change happens best in small groups, in circles. This has been, I confess, one of the hardest core values for us to live into. All of the others, you can look at our life and the way we live our lives, and you can say, yep, always Jesus, beloved mess, open arms, serving hands, among the broken, risking together. You can see all of those very evident in our life together. But transformational circles is not as evident. And in all of the 3 congregations that I've served in the 28 years that I've been a pastor, transformational circles has been the hardest to instill in the life of a congregation. I think that's for a variety of reasons. I think it's been the most challenging in part because our lives are full, and going to one more gathering in the week is hard. I think it's in part because it requires time, and some of us don't have a lot of time. I think in part it's because sometimes we don't see the value of small groups. Or perhaps we've been fooled into thinking that we can go at it alone in our life of faith. And I use that term fooled real intentionally. You cannot do faith alone. You can't. Because there's all kinds of things that roadblocks and challenges that come up in life that trip us up and cause us to get diverted in our pursuit of becoming more and more like Jesus. We need each other in this journey. And so we need to talk about transformational circles. It was tempting this week to think about throwing that one out and not making that a part of our core values anymore, because it's been so hard to instill in the life of a congregation. But I believe that it's so important to growing in our faith and becoming more and more like Jesus. It's so important to achieving our first core value, always Jesus, that I didn't want to do that. And so I want to talk about it this morning. And in our talk back time, I want to hear from you about how we might do it. I got a half a page in the 9 o'clock service of notes, and I'm eager to get notes from you and see what we can do to beef up and live out of this core value in a way that makes sense and transforms our lives. So let me begin today by asking you this question. If you only ate one meal a week, 1 meal a week, what kind of life would you live? You'd be hungry, you'd be skinny, you'd be weak. I don't think you would have a whole lot of energy. I mean, you could eat, you could stuff yourself to the gill in that 1 meal a week. But I don't think the energy from that would last for a whole week's time. And so I don't think you would have much energy to do anything. I think you'd be focused on always being hungry and wanting more. Or maybe your body would get so in between the 1 meal each 7-day period, your body would just get so accustomed to it that it wouldn't be hungry. You would just be in the process of dying. I don't think it's possible to live on 1 meal a week. Lena just came out of 6 weeks of having her jaw wired shut. And, you maybe didn't eat 1 meal a week. You didn't eat anything for a while. You drank it, but you still worked at it, didn't you? And in that time frame, you lost a whole lot of weight. So she saw a whole lot of changes in her inability to eat like she can eat now. Transformational circles, I believe, are as important to our ability to faithfully follow Jesus as coming to worship and as personal devotion and study time. I don't think any one of those is enough, and I think that all 3 of them together make us stronger followers of Jesus. Weekly worship, weekly transformational circles or small groups, and daily Bible reading and devotion. You wouldn't try to run a marathon without training for it, would you? A marathon's what? 26.1 miles, right? Anybody want to run a marathon without training? There's one coming up in Salisbury. I'll stand at the finish line and cheer you on. Billy? Okay. I'll get you signed up, and I'm going to stand at the finish line and wait for you to come across. 26.1 miles running the whole time, not walking. Yeah. Barry's going to join you. So the 2 of you together. So you see, there you go. You're already starting to recognize that if you're going to make that goal, you need somebody to travel the journey with you. You can't do it alone. And I suspect you'd need some training. Now, as young as you are and as fit as you are, having played basketball, I imagine that you might be able to make it a good portion of those miles. I don't know if you can make 26.1 miles. That's a lot of miles. Okay. We'll see. I'll get you registered and I'll stand there and cheer for you, okay? We'll talk afterwards. Well, in our scripture passage today, Paul is writing to the church at Colossae, and he's encouraging them to stay the course with Jesus. There were some folks that were coming into the life of the church that were teaching some false theology and were trying to derail and trip up the followers of Jesus and get them to go back to the Jewish way of understanding faith and life. And Paul was writing to encourage them to run the race with endurance, to put a plan in place to keep them growing into the likeness of Christ, because that's the goal, to always be like Jesus. In all that we do and all that we say, to honor him with our lives. Because as Paul taught in all of his letters, that living in and not of the world is important. And living in and not of the world requires support. Living in and not of the world requires encouragement. It's so hard to do. We get tangled up and entangled in the ways of the world and the ways of life and the ways of everyday American culture that it's hard to be a Christian sometimes. And so we need help to be able to do that. If we're going to live always Jesus, we must have a support system in place. Transformational circles, weekly worship, and daily devotion are a part of that system. Paul talks about it as a 2-step process of transformation here in this passage of Colossians 3 that Pastor Sharon read this morning. If we look at verse 5 and following, verses 5 through 9, we see the first of the 2 steps that Paul talks about. He says, "So put to death the sinful earthly lurkings within you. Have nothing to do with sexual immorality, impurity, lust, and evil desires. Don't be greedy, for a greedy person is an idolater, worshiping the things of this world. Because of these sins, the anger of God is coming. You used to do these things when your life was still part of this world, but now is the time to get rid of anger, rage, malicious behavior, slander, and dirty language. Don't lie to each other, for you have stripped off your old sinful nature and all its wicked deeds. And so what he's saying there is the first step of transformation in our lives is to put off, to put to death, to let go of bad behaviors, bad ways of living, things that keep us from being more and more like Jesus. And the list that he gave isn't an exhaustive list, but it's a list of things that sometimes come into our lives and distract us and keep us from living like Jesus in our world. And so the first step to living more like Jesus is to put to death or put off, let go of these things, these behaviors, these patterns of life, these identities in our lives. And the second step is found in verses 10 through 15, where Paul says this. He says, put on your new nature. It's interesting. He's talking about putting off or putting to death and putting on. It's a letting go of and putting on. Taking on new things, new behaviors, new ways of life. Put on your new nature and be renewed as you learn to know your Creator and become like Him. Renewal comes as we let go of the old and the bad and put on the new and the good. In this new life, he says, it doesn't matter if you're a Jew or Gentile, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbaric, uncivilized, slave or free. Christ is all that matters, and he lives in all of us. That's Paul's way of saying, always Jesus. Since God chose you to be the holy people he loves, you must clothe yourselves with tender-hearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. Above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds us together in perfect harmony, and let the peace that comes from Christ rule in your hearts, for as members of one body you are called to live in peace and always be thankful. So we take off, put to death, and put on. And again, this list that Paul articulates are these new behaviors, these new patterns of life, these new identities. It's not an exhaustive list. It's not all that we have to put on. He's just naming a few. And that process of taking off and putting on, I think, happens very well in a transformational circle, in a group, where we find support and encouragement, grace and love, where we can learn and grow and become and belong. Why do you think AA and NA and recovery groups are so important to someone who has an addiction being able to break free? They've discovered the power and the truth and the reality that transformational circles do help people break free. You know, sticking to a certain diet. Who's had success with that? And if you've had success with it, you've had more success with it because you've been in a group that has held you accountable and helped you stick to that diet. Like Weight Watchers. Or you use an app. Or you have a friend that you're doing this with and you share notes and you encourage one another. The same with an exercise plan. It's always better if you have an accountability partner. Or it's always better, Greg goes every week. And he goes every week and he pays for it. And he has a personal trainer that he sees. Now, my suspicion is if you paid for a membership and went to a gym, you might not go every week. But you have that person waiting on you, expecting you to show up every week at a certain time, and therefore you go every week and you work that out. It's important if we're going to have an exercise plan or a diet plan that we have some accountability partners. I thought I could do it on my own. And so I bought a home gym, and it's upstairs outside my office in the little office that Sharon had before she took her job at hospice. And she keeps saying to me, Martin, you need to get that out of there. Well, it took so much to put it together. And I have this hope that one day I'm going to go up there and use it. It's in as new a condition as it was the day I put it together and put it up there. I've used it maybe 10 times since. And I can't get rid of it because I just think I'm going to go out there and do it. But unless Greg comes over and we do it together, or unless I open it to have someone come in and hold me accountable, I'm just not doing it. And that's true in your lives as well. It's always best if we make a habit of something that we want to have happen in our lives. And so being a part of a transformational circle helps us grow deeper in our relationship with Jesus, because it's a process. It's a becoming, and it's a journey that we're always on. And I don't care how old you are a different person today than you were a year ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, if you're that old, and you'll be a different person in a year from now. You'll be a different person in 2 years from now, because it's a process. In 2009, when I was diagnosed with diabetes, my A1C was 10.7. Normal is 7. My glucose level at that moment in time when they first tested it, when I was having issues in my doctor's office, was 677. Normal is 100. I knew that it would take more than some pills and insulin to change the crash course that I was on at that point in 2009. So Sharon and I attended some education classes, the diabetes education course that the hospital offers for 6 weeks. And that was a very helpful thing for us to have done together, because it involved changing that crash course that I was on, involved changing my diet. But changing my diet wasn't enough. It also involved changing my routine of my day and involving exercise. And I decided that I was going to start walking at the mall. The mall here is 2 miles from my house, and it opens at 7 in the morning. And I felt like I could successfully go there at 7 Monday through Friday and walk for an hour and still get my work day in and not have that be too disrupted by other things. And I could develop a habit and keep a commitment to that. I have found at the mall, I started in 2009, and I am still walking 9 years later. At the mall, I found a community of support. If I don't show up one day, I'll get a text. I know I'll get a text from some of the people that I walk with, and they'll say, "You slacker, where are you?" And that's exactly the term that she'll use. "You slacker, where are you?" And if I miss too many days, when I go back, everybody that I walk with will ask, "What have you been doing?" And I do miss some days because, deer season's in the fall and turkey season's coming up in the spring. And I like to hunt in the morning before work. And so I can't get there from 7 to 8 if I'm in the woods. And so I miss them. And they always inevitably ask, "Where have you been? What have you been doing? We've missed you." That's accountability. That keeps me going. And now 9 years later, I still go to the mall 5 days a week to walk. My A1C is 5.6, so it's under the normal level of 7. And this morning, my glucose was 86, which is really too low. The one med that I take sometimes brings it a little low. And so I have to eat extra carbs. So I had to eat first thing this morning when I got up because I was starting to get jittery. My point in telling you all that is to say that life change involves work, and it involves accountability and support, which we find in transformational circles. If we don't have a group or a support system in place, the life change that we want to see happen will not last, and it will not happen in our lives. So taking off the sinful behaviors that keep you from being like Jesus is the first step. Sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, greed, anger, rage, malicious behavior, slander, dirty language, and that's not the end. That's not an exhaustive list. There's more. Any of that's all that Paul named in this passage, but any of that can inhibit our ability to become more like Jesus. And putting on mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience, forgiveness, and love. And again, that's not an exhaustive list. There's a whole lot more that we can put on, and all of that will help us become more like Jesus. Paul recognizes the power of transformation and transformative circles when he says in verse 16, "Let the message of Christ and all its richness fill your lives. Teach and counsel each other." See, there's what we do in transformational circles. We teach and we counsel each other with all the wisdom that God gives. Sing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs to God with thankful hearts. Teach and counsel each other. That's what happens in transformational circles. In a transformational circle, we come together around Scripture and we share insights, and my insights aren't the same as Andrea's insights or as Ken's insights or as EJ's insights, and I get the opportunity to share mine and get to hear yours. And when EJ shares an insight that I had, something I hadn't thought about from that passage of Scripture, I think in a new way, and I might grow deeper in my relationship with Christ. None of us has the corner on the market. We can always, I don't care how long you've been in this, we can always learn from one another. That's one of the reasons why I like having a talk back time after the sermon. I don't like it to just be about me talking to you. I like to hear from you. And I hear powerful things sometimes. I hear insights that you share that I hadn't thought of, or a way of looking at a passage of Scripture that hadn't crossed my mind. And I grow and I learn from this talk back time that we're going to engage in this morning, though I'm going to guide it a little bit more than I normally guide it, because I have a purpose in that. But it's important for us to be a part of sharing with one another and supporting and encouraging one another as we grow in our faith, taking the old off, putting on the new. Growing to become more and more like Jesus, I believe, happens in transformational circles best. And to that end, here's the question that's going to guide our talk back time. And I'm intentionally short because I want to have enough time. And some of you say intentionally short. It's been a long time. It's been long, but it's not near as long as it normally is. I can tell you that. And to that end, I have this question that I want to ask you. And I'm not asking you this question to induce guilt. I'm asking to learn from you. What is it that keeps you from being in a transformational circle? And what would it take to get you to be in one? So what is it that keeps you from being in a transformational circle, and what would it take to get you to be in a transformational circle? And like I said, I have a whole half a sheet of notes from the first worship gathering, and I'm interested in hearing from you. Thank you, Kelly. Thoughts? And any of you can contribute, whether you've been in one or not.